Hello, everybody. So today we're gonna be reading Amnesia Ticci Toby X FEM Listener Up in Here. We are currently in chapter 20, aka Teddy Bear, but we've got to go back to chapter 19, aka the Rogers case, for a quick but informative recap. So getting into it, so for some background in the very beginning, basically, while 𝐀𝐦𝐬𝐚 was taking care of her business in the shower, Toby went back to the house, her house, which she literally burned to the ground, rightfully in some ways so, and grabbed some basic stuff and this safe that he found that he couldn't open, so he just took it with him. And then he also ended up taking her car as well, even though he's not supposed to drive, but he somehow managed to drive back all the way to his cabin. Some way, somehow, I don't know how. And then he was like, oh my god, maybe she escaped this and that. No, it turns out she actually fell asleep. And then he was like, okay, oh wow, surprising. He went, took care of himself, and there may be like a, huh? Like, what do you mean you haven't charged him for what? But he took care of himself after that. Like, he basically went to bed himself with her. And then we switched to the POV of this detective, Detective Jordan, which basically is the one who's been trying to solve the mystery of these burned houses and these missing people / dead people for years. And he found the original case where it all started, which is the what's it called, the Rogers case, in which, if we don't remember the very beginning, not in the very very beginning, but like getting into the story, we find out that, you know, Toby had enough. Something happened between him and his dad. He burned the house down. Long story short. And yeah, he's like, and the detective is like, they're not dead, they're just missing. I will solve this case. Something like that. You know, like movie detectives. But anyways, other than that short but informative recap, let's get into the warnings. For the warnings getting into this video, there will be mentioned of murders, more mentioned than happening as we read. A spicy scene I think everyone will love. Mental health issues. This is more on Toby more than really anybody else. Abuse mentioned, aka 𝐀𝐦𝐬𝐚 with Brad when she was with Brad. Who get it gets it. New scars and blood. Just some old or new-ish scars reopening and then them having to patch it up. And then basically for any rest of the warnings, remember guys, this is creepypasta. It's gonna have all sorts of horrors into it and a lot of stuff that you wouldn't usually see in a love story, but it is, you know, she's good, she's gorgeous to me, basically. So please do keep that in mind. If you have been following this series of creepypasta stories, then you get what's about to happen, you get, you know, the warnings and such. So anyways, y'all, I've been warned, and enjoy. Chapter 20, Teddy Bear. The morning sunrise poured through the window, filling the cabin with warm light. 𝐀𝐦𝐬𝐚 turned over in the bed, pulling the blanket to cover more of herself. Exhaustion lingered through her sore, achy body. She felt an arm snake around her waist, and her eyes shot open. Toby pulled her against his body, spooning her like a teddy bear. 𝐀𝐦𝐬𝐚 shouted in surprise at the uncalled-for touch, and pushed herself away forcefully. Unfortunately, she had pushed herself so hard that she ended up falling off of the bed with a thump. Toby's eyes widened, and he looked off the edge of the bed. Why would you do that? Toby asked with a puzzled expression, his voice a little gruff from just waking up, and he stretched. What do you mean, why? 𝐀𝐦𝐬𝐚 snapped. You tried to touch me. When did you even get in the bed anyway? After you fell asleep, he answered, laying on his side and using his elbow to prop himself up. He looked down at 𝐀𝐻𝐿, and she glared, standing back on her feet. "Don't touch me," 𝐻𝐿 said sternly, pointing an accusatory finger at him. Toby rolled his eyes and grabbed her wrist, yanking her into his arms. "Hey, calm down. I won't bite. Yet." Toby smirked, burying his face into the crook of her neck. His warm breath brushed over her neck, making her shudder. He wrapped his other arm around her waist again, pressing her against his body. The other hand intertwined their fingers together, and Toby breathed her in deeply. 𝐻𝐿 shrank back in discomfort, but there was a different feeling brewing up inside her chest. There was a sense of longing, but it was small, so it was easy to push away. She started to squirm in his grasp. "Let go, Toby," she said, leaning herself away. His lips, why did I say it like that? His lips, ever so slightly, grazed her skin. "Give me like 5 minutes," he said in a sleepy voice, nuzzling his face back into her neck. Toby's eyes fluttered into a half-open contentness. 𝐻𝐿 groaned at Toby's stubbornness. 3 minutes, 𝐻𝐿 said flatly, knowing she wasn't going to be able to get out of his hold. Her face was flooded with shameful warmth. 4 minutes? 3.5, if you let go of my hand. Deal. Toby took his hand away and wrapped it around her waist with the other one. 𝐻𝐿 sighed, giving up on trying to fight it. Toby smirked against her skin in triumph, laying on his back so she was on top of him. After the longest 3 minutes of her life, 𝐻𝐿 was finally released from his hold. Toby reluctantly let her go, and she sat on the bed. Toby looked her up and down with a playful glint in his eye. "So, where'd you get that outfit?" Toby asked with a tinge of amusement. He knew exactly where she got it, but he wanted to hear her say it. 𝐻𝐿's face got even warmer, almost making her break into a nervous sweat. "I found it," 𝐻𝐿 muttered, giving Toby a side eye. Toby couldn't wipe the smug look off his face. "Where'd you find it?" he asked, arching his eyebrow. 𝐻𝐿 shot a quick glare at Toby. "Your dresser," she said through gritted teeth. At this point, she couldn't tell if the blush on her face was from anger or from total embarrassment, but she was leaning towards the latter. Toby chuckled and stood up. "I don't mind. It looks cute on you," he commented, walking up to the small kitchenette. He opened the fridge, looking through some of the bare amount of contents. "You can't just say that," 𝐻𝐿 protested, standing up to follow him. Toby ignored it with a smirk, followed by an eye roll. 𝐻𝐿 stood up and followed him to the kitchenette, but her eyes caught on the safe. "Toby," she said. "Yeah? Where'd you get that?" 𝐻𝐿 gestured to the safe. "I found it in your house when I was stealing your car," Toby said, casually, pulling out a soda that was hidden behind a bottle of ketchup and cracking it open. "You what?" 𝐻𝐿's eyes widened in utter shock, and she pushed past him, looking through the window. Sure enough, there was her car. In addition, it sported some new bumps and scratches. "It's fine. I only bumped into a few pedestrians," Toby joked, and took a sip of the carbonated drink. But it did not make... But it didn't... But 𝐻𝐿 did not laugh one bit. "You could have crashed it." 𝐻𝐿 turned to face it. "But I didn't." He smirked. This man, I swear. Leaning against the counter, Toby really knew how to get under her skin. The touching, the stupid nicknames, the constant joking, that damn charming smile. 𝐻𝐿 grew redder at her own intrusive thoughts. "Whatever," 𝐻𝐿 grumbled, her eyes flicking back to the safe. "Why'd you bring this back here?" 𝐻𝐿 asked softly, tilting the safe up to her. She couldn't help but feel a little relieved and a little nervous about what lies in the safe. "I wanted to know what was inside." He said this, looking at the safe as well. "I don't know the code, and I was going to break it open with my hatchet, but I figured I'd wait for you to open it." 𝐻𝐿 looked at the safe before putting in the code on the padlock. Toby tried to peek over to see what the code was, but she covered it with her hand. Once the safe was opened, and Toby peered to see what was inside. 𝐻𝐿 pulled out a folded gray hoodie that had a paper flower on top of it. Toby was underwhelmed by what was in the safe. "I can't believe it survived that fire," 𝐻𝐿 said, setting up the corsage on top of the safe and pulling the jacket over her. What is it? Toby picked up the paper flower to inspect it. Without warning, his eyes glossed over with a wave of emotion, and he gently fixed one of the crooked petals. It's the things you gave me before you disappeared, Wyan muttered, fixing the sleeves of the worn-out hoodie. Toby looked back at Wyan as the buried feelings came back to the surface. Why would you keep this? Toby asked. His voice changed from its joking tone to one that was quiet and desperate for some sort of logical answer. Wyan looked at him, not expecting the sudden change of emotion. It was a good question. Why would she keep these things? It happened so long ago. She should have moved on and thrown the stuff out, but she didn't. Wyan glanced between the corsage and Toby. I don't know, Wyan answered. She lied. She knew why she kept it, but she didn't have the guts to say it. The words wouldn't fit right, especially now. She just couldn't say, hey, I missed you because you just disappeared, and I just kind of thought you were dead, but you ended up being a murderer, and I still can't help but missing you. Saying that would bring a different level of awkwardness to the conversation. Toby looked down at the corsage. I never got to give you this to my English. I never got to give this to you myself, Toby whispered, staring at the paper corsage. He carefully took Wyan's hand, and he tied the corsage around it, making sure it wasn't too tight or too loose. Her eyes watched as he did so. Her expression softened as she spoke. Toby? She started. Yes? He held her hand, meeting Wyan's eyes. When we were younger, did you have feelings for me? Chapter 21. One more chance. Detective Jardis hurried down the hallway, his arms full of papers and his eyes sleepless. He walked past a few people in the hall and went to Officer McKee, who was in the lounge. I have a suspect, he said, nearly out of breath. McKee looked over at Detective Jardin, raising an eyebrow. A few people gave a glance before continuing their own conversation. You have found a suspect for who started the fire? She questioned, her hand strapping her hip. Jordan nodded and poured the papers into one of the coffee tables. He put the stacks of papers and notes in piles, sorting them somewhat chaotically. 10 years ago, the Rogers case was dismissed as a spontaneous fire. We had the pattern over dozens of these random fires for the past 10 years. Jordan started. It turns out we missed some things, he said, looking at the medical records. What do you mean? McKee asked, picking up a few of the papers and scanning them with her eyes. What I mean is that there have been reports of domestic abuse, both physical and mental, but they were never taken into account. He was institutionalized on multiple occasions, not to mention the death of his sister in the crash. Jordan rambled, flipping through the papers to get out the medical records. She took the papers, examining them. What's this kid's full name? She asked. Well, if he's still alive, he's not a kid anymore. He's in his late 20s, Jordan said, a smirk growing on his face. McKee nodded, looking at all the other papers. Tobias Aaron Rogers. The silence deafened the air around them. Wyan's question seemed to echo in his mind. Oh, sorry, y'all. That's like a whole, switch of POV, y'all. Did you have feelings for me? It was a difficult question to answer. A part of Toby wanted to say yes and confess his teenage feelings. But there was a whole nother part of him that denied his affection for Wyan as a whole. He never really felt anything remotely close to the feelings he had for Wyan, which made him think it could be something else or that it was just a phase. I did have feelings when we were young, Toby said softly. I was going to confess to you at the party with that corsage. I ended up wussing out because of my God, my English. I ended up wussing out of it because I saw you with Brad. Toby let go of her soft hand. He took a step back, both physically and mentally. I guess I never thought I had a chance. Wyan's theory was confirmed. He used to like her a lot. Wyan looked at her wrist before taking off the corsage with careful fingers. I didn't want that kiss, Wyan said, setting the corsage back into the safe. You would have had a better chance with me than Brad did. Toby's face lit up with hope, but he tried to appear like he didn't care. Really? He said, with a small hint of happiness in his voice. Yeah, you would have, Wyan said. I would have probably given you a good chance, but that was years ago. Ryan explained, running a hand through her hair, I'm assuming. Toby furrowed his brows in confusion. So? Toby tilted his head, his bangs sweeping over his forehead. His eyes were boring into Ryan's as he waited for an answer. Ryan looked at him, not wanting to hurt his feelings for obvious reasons, but also becoming upset that he wasn't grasping the reality of the situation. I haven't seen you for 10 years, and you expect me to love you? Ryan said it in a calm yet harsh tone, not to mention, you fucking killed someone and thought that was okay. Toby's face went flat. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that she was still mad because of that. He was a terrible guy, and in Toby's mind, anything Brad did, he could do better. Toby leaned against the doorway. I killed dicks like him all the time. He wasn't good for you. Just look at the black eye he gave you. Toby crossed his arms, nodding his head towards Ryan's black eye. That's not my point, Ryan argued. Then what's your point? Did you want to stay with that abusive, alcoholic bastard? Toby asked, giving her a questioning look. Ryan went quiet for a moment, contemplating what he said. Sure, Brad wasn't a great guy to begin with, but she had no clue if being here would be any better. I don't know, Ryan said, rubbing her eyes, only to flinch at the bruising. Toby's face flickered with concern, and he almost asked if she was okay, but he didn't want to upset her further. He leaned against the counter. You won't be able to leave. You'd die before you knew it, Toby said bluntly, tapping his finger against the counter. Ryan looked at him with a medley of fear, anger, sadness, and even a little regret. She's scared of what could happen to her, angry at Toby and sad about her old life, and she regretted ever talking to him. I don't know what to say to you. Ryan looked away, keeping her distance from him. Toby looked away as well. He's never been in this position before, let alone in a relationship. If you could even call what they had a relationship. It's my job, Toby muttered. I kill people. He added quietly. Ryan's senses of dread skyrocketed. You're a serial killer? Toby, that's not a job. Ryan said in all seriousness. She stepped away from him slowly as her eyes watched him. It's for me. I have to. I don't have a choice. Toby protested. Trust me, if I could stop, I would have years ago. Then why haven't you stopped? Ryan asked, the sting of tears starting to form behind her eyes. Because I just have to. If I told you, you would think I'm a madman. Toby replied, sounding a little more agitated. Trust me, you already are. You're already there. So sad. Trust me, you're already there, Ryan shouted, tears starting to stream down her face. I feel like I don't know who you are. Toby stopped, realizing that the conversation was turning into an argument. He talked in a softer voice. Just give me one chance. One. Toby begged, looking at Ryan. As soon as I mess up, I'll never talk to you again. If I mess up, you can hate me, turn me into the police, or even let me rot in this cabin by myself. I don't care. I just want one chance. Toby pleaded. Ryan didn't look convinced by what Toby was saying was true, so he continued. I know I did terrible things, and especially to you, and I'm so sorry. Toby said softly. I know I basically deserve death row, but I just want to know what I missed out on 10 years ago. I was always scared, and I was a dumbass. I should have told Brad to fuck off, and I should have left that horrible party. I've lived the past 10 years without knowing you because of fear. Ryan wiped the tear from her face with her sleeve as Toby rambled on, which was something he did even when they first met. She let out a shaky sigh of relief, hearing that Toby's motives weren't malicious. Ryan thought to herself for a moment before finally saying something she might regret. I'll make you a deal on one condition. Chapter 22. Kathie's Diner. Toby looked at Ryan with tension-filled eyes. An awful gut feeling started to rise in his stomach. He had been alone for the past 10 years, unknowing that there was someone willing to give this serial killer a chance. But maybe there was. I will give you one chance. But the second you get caught by the police, I was just someone who was held hostage. Wine crossed her arms while the other played with the drawstring in the old hoodie. On the old hoodie. Well, Toby saw nothing wrong with this. He avoided the cops ever since he was 18, and he's done a damn good job at it too. He knew that if he ever got caught, Slenderman, the operator, would get him out of the situation. Just like when he set his own house on fire. Deal. Toby agreed, knowing that there was no way for this to go wrong. I wonder. Wyatt nodded with a deep breath, thinking about everything that had happened to get her to this moment. This terrible, terrible moment. Toby exhaled and went back to the fridge. There was still nothing inside of it, but he found it a good excuse for what he was about to say next. How about we go out for breakfast? Toby raised an eyebrow, and his head turned back to Wyan. Wyan shrugged, feeling indifferent. She also had no appetite for food, even if she was hungry. Toby smiled and went to go get his things. Wyan watched him go into the back room before she sat on the couch. She looked at her feet, realizing that she didn't have any socks or shoes, mainly because she was abducted from her home in a vulnerable state. Hey, Toby? Wyan called out from the living room. Yeah? Toby answered. I need socks and shoes since you burned out all the stuff I own. Wyan said in the most passive-aggressive manner. Toby chuckled from the other room, and after a minute, he brought out some socks and old Converse. The Converse were easily 5 years old, maybe more. One of them had a different shoelace than the other, and they both had duct tape around them. Wyan gave Toby an annoyed look as he held out the monstrosities. What? They're the only small shoes I had. Toby rolled his eyes. I can buy you some new stuff after we eat. Wyan begrudgingly accepted the new shoes, but the idea of him buying her things is something she could get behind. If she was going to be stuck here, she was going to make his pockets hurt. Period. She took the socks, which thankfully were a new pair, and put them on. The Converse were still a little big on her, but they were doable. She stood up, and Toby muttered with a laugh under his breath. What are you laughing at? Wyan furrowed her eyebrows. You look homeless, Toby said, trying to keep a straight face. No shit, I am homeless. Wyan's eyebrows knitted together, and she nudged him in the arm. Nuh-uh, you're living with me. You were homeless for 5 seconds, he protested, nudging her in the arm in return. Toby opened the front door to the cabinet and checked his pockets to make sure he had everything. His neck popped a little to the side in a tick. Wyan scoffed and stepped out. A cold breeze blew through the pair as they made their way to the car. Wyan got into the driver's side, and a hint of relief was found in her expression. Thankfully, her car was still in one piece. It was one of the few things that she still had from the fire. The faint smell of smoke still lingered in the car, making Wyan sigh in disappointment. Toby sat on the passenger side and clicked on his seatbelt. I know a good place to eat, somewhere I haven't been in a while, Toby said as Wyan started the car. Do you have directions on your phone? Wyan asked, putting her car into drive and creeping down the dirt road. Don't you have your phone? Toby asked. Obviously, he knew she didn't have a phone because it was destroyed in the fire. He just wanted to get a rise out of her. He thought it was funny. Wyan glared, and her eye twitched. Give me the damn directions, Wyan said, not happy with her situation in the slightest. Okay, Toby laughed, pulling out his cracked phone and typing into Google Maps. The whole drive was pretty quiet, with the exception of when Toby's Tourette's would act up. When they got out of the woods, they took a lot of back roads until they were at a road that split a grass field in half. A diner in the middle of a sad-looking street glowed brightly in contrast to the rundown buildings around it. There was a large neon sign that said Kathie's Diner over the door. Toby pointed to it. That's the place, he said. Wyan turned into the parking lot and found a spot in the shade. She looked at Toby. How do you know about this place? There's only a few people here, Wyan asked while he unbuckled his seatbelt. I used to come here with a few guys. It's a restaurant that really isn't under any police radar, Toby said as he left the car. Wyan followed in suit, getting out of the car and looking at the building. They walked inside and was greeted by an interior that was ripped right out of the 80s. The checkered board tiles lined the floor. Pink and teal tables and chairs littered the place. The walls had a Coca-Cola and neon signs, along with other themed decor. There was a jukebox that played old rock and roll, enhancing the whole ambiance of the place. Ryan was pleasantly surprised. As she awed at everything, a friendly face walked up to them. An older lady with gray hair that was tied up in a bun offering them menus. She wore a knee-length skirt that was teal and pink to match the diner. Hi y'all, my name's Kathie. Is it just you two today? Her voice was slightly southern, but it also had a sweet tone to it. Toby nodded. Yeah, a booth for two, please, he said, tucking his hands in his pocket. Kathie gasped. Oh my lord, is that you, Toby? I barely recognized you. Look how old you've gotten, and you grew out your hair too. This is so sweet, actually. Kathie said in a peachy manner, pinching Toby's non-scarred cheek, a slight awkward chuckle escaping Toby's lips. Yeah, it's me, Toby said, an embarrassed pink color painting his cheeks. Kathie looked over to YN. And who's this young lady? Kathie asked. YN, she replied, giving a half wave. It seemed like Toby's awkwardness was starting to rub off on her. It is lovely to meet you, she said, putting a hand over her heart with a smile. I'll give you to a booth, she said, waiting for them to follow to a table. Toby and YN sat across from each other, and Kathie put the menus in front of them. I'll give you a couple minutes to decide what you want, Kathie said, before going back behind the counter and into the kitchen. Toby picked up the menu and peeked over to see YN staring right back up at him. Her eyes narrowed at him, forcing the smile that dared to invade her expression. What are you looking at? YN said. I could be asking you the same question, Toby answered, hiding the lower half of his face behind the menu. YN rolled her eyes and read the menu. A lot of it sounded pretty good, and the pictures provided behind each meal made it even seem more appetizing. So, what are you going to eat? YN asked, her eyes flicking over to Toby. The same thing I always get. Toast, scrambled eggs, bacon, and sausage links. Oh, and a Dr. Pepper, too. Toby smiled, brushing back his hair. YN looked a little shocked for a moment. That seemed like a lot of food for someone who was so skinny and scrawny, but at the same time, he was incredibly strong. It was something that almost seemed supernatural. All right, I think I'll get waffles with whipped cream and a sweet tea. YN set down the menu with a smile. Toby's face scrunched up. I hate waffles, he muttered, setting down his menu. Good. That means you won't eat mine, YN smirked, crossing her arms on the table. Toby shook his head and leaned back on the booth. YN hated to admit it, but this was nice. It was not as scary as she thought hanging out with a murderer would be. She didn't feel entirely safe, but this was a start. YN's mind wandered off, and she looked at Toby. That's when she saw a certain symbol on his neck, one that seemed oddly familiar. Chapter 23. All that and a slice of bacon. YN stared at the mark on Toby's neck. It was an O with an X through it. It almost seemed tattooed on his neck. Some of Toby's overgrown hair hid the mark from YN's view. She looked away. The waitress, Kathie, walked over, and they both told her their orders. Toby gathered their menus and handed them to the kind old lady. YN cupped her chin in her right hand with her elbow on the table. Her eyes traveled down to her hand, where Brad's engagement ring was missing. There was an old emptiness that lingered there, but also a sense of freedom. She knew Brad wasn't a great guy, and that he was a bit of an abusive alcoholic, but she never knew why she felt so compelled to stay. Her train of thought was interrupted by Toby clearing his throat. So, how have you been? Toby said with a more than awkward smile. YN rolled her eyes at his sad attempt to start a conversation. Fine. What about you? YN asked in return, crossing her arms on the table. I've been good, Toby nodded, his eyes slowly trailing away from 𝐀𝐻𝐿𝐴𝐻𝐿. 𝐻𝐿 pondered something before tilting her head. Hey, how are you still alive? 𝐻𝐿 questioned, sounding carelessly blunt. Toby took on an expression of shock, and he scratched the back of his head. What do you mean? Toby looked back at her. What I mean is, I thought you died a long time ago. You went missing, and then you just popped back into my life. 𝐻𝐿 leaned back against her seat. Toby shrugged, thinking about how to word his response. I've been by myself at that cabin in the woods, Toby said, as if it were the most normal thing to do. It's gotten pretty repetitive. All you did was sit around at that cabin for the last 10 years? What about the night you disappeared? Where were you then? Did you run off or were you taken? 𝐻𝐿's rapid-fired questions at Toby, just to get an response. Thank goodness the plates of food came right out before he could respond. Toby gleefully took the plate, though it was piping hot. He couldn't feel a thing. Be careful, the plates are hot, Kathie said as she set down their drinks. There was the mist aroma of bacon and maple syrup that made 𝐻𝐿's stomach growl in an anticipating hunger. Thank you, 𝐻𝐿 murmured, getting her fork. She was rather surprised at how quickly the food came out. It seemed like they only talked for 5 minutes. This town is weirder than she thought. Change of POV. Detective Jardin looked at the corkboard, which had multiple pictures and newspaper articles all regarding the house fires in Denver. With crossed arms, he took a few steps back. He had no hard evidence that would prove Toby is guilty of these disappearances, but he felt like he was close. Officer McKee walked and stood next to Jardin as he scanned the board. You're really all out of whack over these cases, huh? She smirked, her voice filled with authority, but also with a tinge of playfulness. If I can find evidence for one case, I can solve them all, Jardin stated as he looked at all the addresses of the houses that were pinned up before an idea struck him. Hold on. McKee rolled her eyes as Detective Jardin scurried over to his laptop and loaded up a map. He printed out a small map of the region of the house fires and pulled out a red marker. Uncapping it with his teeth, he started to scribble a dot over every house that had been burned down. Officer McKee looked over at Jardin's shoulder at the paper with red dots. His eyes darted from the addresses and back to the map as he quickly marked each one. McKee was sure that this could be driving him mad. Jardin connected the dots on the page. It was rough, but there was a connection between each and every one of the houses. The dots connected into a symbol that looked like an O with an X crossed through the center. Every dot was connected, except for one. I'll be damned, McKee muttered as she looked at the paper. She pointed to the outlying dot. What about this one? That was the most recent fire, Detective Jardin said as he went to pin up the map. I have a feeling that the fire was a mistake. No one would take this much time to make a perfect symbol just to throw it off by just one. McKee raised her eyebrows with a skeptical look. Jardin dismissed her look. There's more going on here than a pattern of house fires, Jardin said, pointing to the board with his marker. I have a feeling that there is more to this than we think it is. Change of POV again. Toby crunched down on the bacon without any hesitation. I forgot how good this place is, Toby said in a dreamy voice as he quickly finished a piece of bacon. 𝐻𝐿 started to eat her waffles, and they were delicious, of course, but she still eyed Toby's plate, which had 3 more pieces of bacon. Yoink, she smirked, snatching a piece of bacon with her fork. She took a greedy bite of the scrumptious bacon. Toby looked at her as he was snapped out of his food-filled trance. Hey, you have your own food, he pouted, trying to make himself sound hurt by her actions. You can have a bite of mine, she smiled, gesturing to her waffles that were topped with fruit and whipped cream. Toby's lips curled in disgust at the waffles, but he did stab his fork into one of the strawberries. I don't think that's a very fair trade, but fine, he grumbled, chewing the bittersweet strawberry. If you were someone else, I would have thrown hands," he said, the corners of his lip curling into a small smirk. "I'm sure you would have," Wine sighed, taking another bite of her meal. With a little more small talk and finishing up their food, they were done. A small smile lingered on her face as she stacked her trash and dishes into a convenient stack. Toby felt his pockets and pulled out his wallet. Then $20 to pay for the meal. Kathie came by and dropped off the bill, picking up the plates. "You can just leave the money with the check. I'll come back for it in a few minutes," she said in a sweet manner as she walked back to the kitchen to drop off the dishes. Toby thanked her and slipped the money into the checkbook. Toby fished into his wallet again, this time pulling out a $100 bill. He put it under the check so no one could steal it. Wyan looked at Toby in surprise at the amount of money. You tipped $100? Wyan said, her eyes filled with surprise. Toby shrugged it off casually. "Yeah, I rarely come here anymore, and she's the only waitress here." Toby scooted out of the booth, and Wyan did the same. The gesture Toby showed towards a waitress was sweet but very expensive. How the hell does he have that kind of money anyway? They made their way back to the car, and Wyan looked at Toby, studying him. Toby caught on to Wyan's stare, and he raised a questioning eyebrow. "What?" he asked, confused as to why she would be looking at him so intently. "Where do you work?" Wyan questioned. Toby blinked again. "I work from home, but I go out to do my job. I'm kind of self-employed, but at the same time I'm not. I don't know how to explain it." Toby shook the idea off. Toby shook the idea off, looking towards the pavement under their feet as they walked to the car. "Then try." Chapter 24. Crazy. Toby sat in the car, twiddling his thumbs as the silence lingered over them. Wyan was sitting crisscrossing in the car, waiting for him to explain how he got all this money. Toby exhaled deeply. Toby briefly glanced away. "I'm kind of a proxy for this godlike entity." Toby gave a half shrug, and she leaned back into his seat. Wyan gave him a look of utter confusion. "So, it's a cult," Wyan replied, shifting her seated position to have one leg crossed over the other. Toby shook his head quickly. "It's not a cult," Toby said in return. "Do you sacrifice people for this godlike entity?" Wyan asked. "No, yeah, sometimes," Toby said in a rush, feeling the mark on his neck. "That's a cult." Wyan pointed to Toby with a stern expression. Her eyes flickered at the tattoo symbol on Toby's neck. "Is that your cult symbol?" Wyan asked, her accusations turning into more teasing questions. "Yeah, how'd you know?" Toby asked, his rough hand falling into his lap. "I just assumed," Wyan said, studying the mark. "So, does Mr. Bossman pay you to kill people?" Wyan asked, her tone becoming serious. Toby nodded yes, looking away. He felt awfully vulnerable and pressured by her questions. He has never been confronted like this before. Sure, he does get a few weird looks in public, but it was nothing compared to Wyan's opinion. He felt like an animal in the zoo being stared at by a bunch of relentless kids. Wyan sighed and stuck the key into the ignition, starting the car. Okay. Wyan thought through her options. She could drive to the police station and turn this madman in. Or she could drive to her family and beg for help. But she felt a sudden urge to stay. She didn't know if it was the money, the man, or the sheer terrifying thrill of her situation. If she knew anything, it's that she didn't feel like having to tell everyone that her fiancé was chopped up into a bunch of tiny little pieces and incinerated. "Where are we going to now?" Wyan asked, pulling out to the main road. Toby was zoned out in thought. His eyes slowly went to meet Wyan's. "Crazy," Toby answered. "That's not what I meant. I asked what place is in what store." Wyan kept a firm grip on the steering wheel, but she couldn't help but crack a smile at Toby's stupid answer. "Crazy? We can go wherever you want," Toby said, leaning back comfortably in his seat. "Wherever I want?" Wyan gave him a suspicious look. Did I stutter? Toby smirked, looking out of his window. You did actually. Wyan bit her tongue in order not to smile. Just drive. Toby mumbled as he shook his head, like he was shaking off this nonsense. After a short drive, Wyan drove to a large, very populated mall and parked in an empty spot. A lot of the parking lot was empty, so she got to park close. Toby tilted his head as he gazed at the giant building. This is where he wanted to go? Toby questioned, not having a great feeling about being in such a wide, public place. Wyan smiled and unbuckled her seatbelt. Of course, I haven't been here for years, Wyan said, closing the door as she got out of the car. I'm surprised they haven't closed this place down, she added. Toby walked beside her as they approached the mall. An anxious feeling, invaded his system as he approached what felt like doom. They walked past the empty planter boxes into the glass front doors. Toby gave one of them a pull. It's locked, he stated flatly, looking at Wyan, her face becoming saddened with disappointment, and she gave a weak shrug. That's all right. I'll just drive us somewhere else, Wyan said, and she turned to leave. Toby couldn't help but feel a pinch of Wyan's disappointment, and it upset him that the mall wasn't open when they just so happened to be there. A hand grabbed Wyan's wrist, holding her still with a firm but gentle grasp. Wait, right here, Toby said as he ran back towards the car. Wyan watched with a mix of surprise and confusion. She put her hands up to the glass and peered inside to try and see what was in the dark. Toby's footsteps reappeared, fast. But before Wyan could get a word, Toby used the point of the bottom of the hatch's handle to slam into the glass, causing the panel to shatter in return. Wyan's face fell into shock. What the hell are you doing? Wyan shouted, glancing around to see if there were spectators, and they weren't. I'm going inside? Toby raised an eyebrow, elbowing the glass of the door so it would crumble to the ground. Wyan's hands grasped around Toby's arm. You can't just break in! Wyan's expression hardened, and she tried to pull Toby away from the mall in fear of getting caught. But it's easy. Look. But it's easy, what the hell? Toby smirked, reaching his hand through the hole and unlocking it. The door clicked, and Toby pulled his hand away, pulling it open from the outside. Look! What if we get caught? What would we tell the police? Wyan asked, glancing into the mall, then to Toby. I don't care if I get caught doing this. I'm probably going to get the electric chair either way. Toby fanned away the questions with his hand casually and walked through the door, holding it open for Wyan. Okay, but what about me? Wyan gestured to herself. I'm not a wanted criminal and I'm not trying to go to jail. Well, tell the police that I forced you to, Toby said, leaning in close and placing his hand on the small of her back to nudge her inside. With a short stumble, she went inside, being cautious of the broken glass. Wyan huffed in frustration and looked around. The tall ceilings were dangling with old decorations. The food court's tables were covered in a film of dust. Some of the chairs were clearly neatly tucked into place, while others were knocked over on the floor. A loud silence was thick in the stale air. This place hasn't been busy in a while, Wyan muttered, nostalgia pulling at her heart as she remembered all the times she and Maddie would come here, but only when Maddie was still tolerable. Echo! Toby called out, cupping his hands on the sides of his mouth. His voice echoed off the walls and down the line of the small shops. Wyan's face turned to Toby, giving him a, are you serious right now type of look. What? Can a guy have some fun? Maybe you should try it sometime. Toby smirked, hopping on top of a stone bench and walking across it like a tightrope. Wyan sighed. She couldn't believe this grown-ass man was being so childish in such a stressful situation. It felt like he went from being an awkward, anxious teenager to a criminal man-child. You're dumb. You're gonna get caught, Wyan said as she followed behind him, watching as he jumped off the stone edge, holding his hatchet tightly in his grasp. Nuh-uh, Toby mumbled, glancing around all the shops. Which one do you want to go to? He changed the subject. Wyan narrowed her eyes, and she was about to speak, but her own eyes landed on a shop nearby. It was her favorite store in the mall, but the entrance was blocked by a metal gate. An idea came to mind. "I want to go to that one," Wine said, pointing to the store. Toby's eyes followed the direction she pointed, and he nodded, going up to the metal gate. He crouched and turned his head, trying to find the lock. He gave the gate a harsh shake, and his gaze flicked over to the bottom corner. "Ah, found it," he said, kneeling on the dusty floor and pulling his small pocket knife out of his jean pocket. He tucked the tip of the blade into the small lock and jiggled it until he was able to turn it. It unlocked. Wine smiled and walked up to the entrance of it. Toby pushed away the gate, and there was a small distance murmur. Toby's head snapped in its direction. A beam of light flashed in the direction, and his heart skipped a beat. There was someone else here with them. Chapter 25. Dead Silent. The quiet chatter down the corridor made Toby's head swivel. He slipped his arm around Wine's waist and pulled her into the shop, closing the gate behind them. Wine's face went into slight shock as she was brought behind the cashier counter. She was about to protest, but Toby put a gloved hand over her mouth, silencing her. The flashlight in the hallway grew brighter and brighter until it shined into the room they were in. It cast shadows on the wall. Wine looked at Toby's face before gently removing his hand from her mouth and holding it. It took everything in Toby not to crack a smile at their hand-holding, but he was snapped back into reality when he heard the people in the hall talking. "There's no one here," a female voice said, to which a male voice replied. "How the hell did all that glass break?" he asked. Their footsteps slowly faded into the distance. Wine exhaled a relieved breath, and she peeked around the corner of the cabinets. They left. "I think those were police officers," Toby whispered, leaning to peek around the corner with YN. "Thanks, Captain Obvious," she murmured back, smiling slightly. Her eyes traveled back down to their hands. They were still clasped together. Wine's face was tinted with blush, and she slowly let go of his hand, only for him to squeeze it more. Not yet. They could still be out there. Toby steadied as an excuse to hold her hand. Wine sighed and clasped his hand again. They waited for a while, and Wine's thoughts were soon solely focused on his hand. Even through the glove, it felt like his hand was so rough and calloused compared to hers, most likely from his frequent use of weapons. The mall went dead silent. Toby let go of Wine's hand and stood up. He crept over to the gate and checked to see if the officers were truly gone. "They're gone," Toby said, his voice now sounding at a normal level. Wine nodded and came out of hiding. Though the light was dim, she could see the inside of the store. It looked just as she remembered it, like a moment frozen in time. She glanced around the clothing racks, and Toby followed her, looking at the stuff she was looking at. "You can get whatever you want," Toby reminded her, stashing his hands in his pockets. She nodded happily, though there was a still lingering fear in the back of her mind about getting caught. After what felt like hours to Toby, but it was really less than an hour, they left with bags filled with things for YN. They had things like shoes, clothes, feminine products, bathroom supplies, and everything else Wine wanted. Every time they would leave a store, Wine would make him leave some money, even though all the stores were closed down. It was only around midday when they got outside. Toby took all the bags and loaded them into the back seat. Toby got into the passenger seat and tossed his hatchet in the back seat floorboard. "Where next?" Toby asked, clicking in his seatbelt. Wine contemplated her options before deciding. "We should go buy some food for the house," Wine answered. Wine wasn't used to having the choice of where to go and what to buy due to her relationship with Brad. Usually, Brad would be the one to pick where they go and what they do, so someone giving her the option was like a breath of fresh air. They arrived at a small shopping center that was loaded with cars and people. Toby immediately became anxious. He felt around his pockets for his mouthguard, but he forgot it at home. Damn it. He was so focused on YN that he left it at his cabin. He silently panicked in his head. Wine parked in an open spot and turned off the car, storing the keys in her pocket. Toby looked over at her. "Can I stay in the car?" he asked quickly, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden predicament. I'm going to need your help carrying stuff to the car, 𝐀𝐻𝐽 said, resting her hand on the door handle. Toby let out a breath he had been holding, looking out the window cautiously. 𝐀𝐻𝐽 noticed his fidgety behavior and did something that was completely instinctual. He took his gloved hand and held it. You'll be fine, 𝐀𝐻𝐽 said, looking at him sincerely. No one's going to be focused on you. Toby's cheeks turned a faint pink, and he turned his head away for a moment. He was finally remembering why he never went out in public. The people. He was not a people person in any way, shape, or form. Toby took a deep breath before nodding. Okay, I'll go, he said, opening his car door. Toby got out of the car, and reality finally set in. People with shopping carts and people driving cars. There were people outside the store looking at all the plants. There were workers gathering the carts to put them back in the store. Toby watched as his vision started to tunnel and his heart drummed against his chest. Toby couldn't remember the last time he was out in a crowded public setting all by himself, which was pretty sad considering he was a 28-year-old man. Toby was too focused on everything around him to notice when 𝐀𝐻𝐽 took his hand again. She started to guide him in the direction of the store. Toby floated behind, trying not to freak out. It was like everything was 10 times louder and 10 times brighter. Toby put his head up, trying to conceal himself in some sort of way. Inside the store was no better. The music that played over the intercom and the loud announcement that blasted over the store. The cluttered aisles of the store. The blistering white lights. Toby gritted his teeth and on the edge of hyperventilating. He squeezed onto 𝐻𝐽's hands for rest. 𝐻𝐽 didn't mind. 𝐻𝐽 didn't mind it. She grabbed a cart and pushed it into the store, walking around to find the bare minimum of food they would need. She would occasionally rub his hand with her thumb in a soothing manner. Toby stuck close to 𝐻𝐽 the whole time, his head looking down or at items that 𝐻𝐽 put in the cart. He was very out of place the whole time. Even though no one was paying attention to him, the voices in his head said otherwise. A long shopping trip later, with a few weird stares, they've made it to the parking lot. 𝐻𝐽's cart was so filled with groceries that she pushed through the parking that it was just too much damn groceries, y'all. A lot. Lucky her, because grocery prices are absolutely insane these days. Anyways, Toby was brought back to reality when one of the car horns blared, creating an awful ringing in his ears. Toby nearly jumped out of his own skin, and he broke into a nervous sweat. 𝐻𝐽 also jumped at the loud car horn before yelling at the car that honked them. 𝐻𝐽 looked at Toby with a worried expression. Come on, we're almost back to the car, she said softly, taking a gentle hold of his sleeve and pulling him to the car. That guy was an asshole, 𝐻𝐽 grumbled, looking at the car that was so entitled as to honk its car horn. Toby was almost in a state of shock, jumping on at everything and everyone. 𝐻𝐽 started the car to get air conditioning going, and Toby started loading groceries into the truck very quickly, almost frantically. 𝐻𝐽 was about to offer to help, but Toby had already finished putting the bags in the car. Can we go home? Toby stuttered, leaning close to her as he glanced around. 𝐻𝐽 nodded. Yeah, I was planning on it. I didn't think we needed anything else from the store. 𝐻𝐽 answered, feeling her pockets for her keys and pulling them out. Toby quickly picked 𝐻𝐽 up around the hips. Hey! 𝐻𝐽 protested. Toby opened the car to the back seat. He put her inside so she was laying down before crawling in after her and shutting the door behind them. Chapter 26. Heartbeat. Officer's POV, y'all. McKinney shined her flashlight in the direction of the dark corridors in the mall. She cursed under her breath, pulling out her radio from her belt. This is Officer McKee. The mall is clear, she said, listening to the response. Are you sure? The officer asked. Their voice sounded static on the radio. Damn positive, McKinney responded, beaming the flashlight around and continuing to take another lap around the mall. It was probably some stupid teenagers trying to cause trouble, the other person said with a light chuckle. McKinney sighed. I'll head back to the station, she said onto the radio, clipping it back to her belt. The soles of her shoes clicked against the mall tile until there was a slight squish under her foot. She looked down to see a mud print on what looked like a boot. This so happened to be another set of shoe prints that followed the boot ones. McKinney pulled out her radio and switched the line. Hey, Mr. Detective, I think I found something. Change in POV. Toby, what are you doing? Wyan protested, trying to squirm her way out of his arms. If it weren't for the grocery bags that crowded the back seat, she probably could have gotten out of his grasp. Toby wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face into her chest before he started to sob. Wyan froze. She had no clue what to think of this. She had never had someone, let alone a man, cry and cling to her with a death grip. Even when she was in her old relationship, Brad was never vulnerable in the slightest. Wyan's hand slowly found its way into his hair, combing through the mess of chocolate locks. Her upset expression faltered, and she relaxed. At least she tried. Toby gripped her hoodie and trembled, crying the hardest he had in years. The last time he cried in front of someone else was before his sister died. Toby, what's wrong? Wyan asked, her voice becoming softer. Toby's breath stuttered, and he hiccuped. I don't know, he said, stuttering profusely. He almost sounded panicked. Wyan rubbed his back, shushing him and trying to calm him down so he wouldn't hyperventilate. Toby, it's okay. Just breathe, sweetie. Wyan bit her lip. Sweetie? She didn't mean for that to slip out. She silently prayed that he didn't hear her or that he wouldn't think much of it. Toby's frantic breathing soon got to slightly more stable terms. Tears continued to fall down his lightly freckled cheeks like shooting stars in the night sky. He sniffled and laid the side of his head on her chest, listening to her soothing heartbeat. Toby seemed very small, as if his inner child was resurfacing after years of being trapped beneath brutal murder and mental illness. Why are you crying? Wyan asked, gingerly brushing his bangs away from his sad eyes. Toby took a deep breath, trying to compose himself enough to speak. I hate people. I don't like it here, Toby mumbled. There was more to the story than just that. But Toby didn't want to vent it all to her in such an inconvenient place. A wave of vulnerability and embarrassment washed over him. His iron grip loosened to a gentle hold on her, and he rested into her welcoming arms, even if they weren't entirely welcome. Wyan figured that he was probably overwhelmed by so much so fast. Toby had been isolated in his cabin for a very long time. He had no human interaction except for the people he killed. Even when he didn't kill people, such as in his childhood, he was quiet and reserved. You know, I can't take us home unless I'm in the driver's seat. Wyan shifted her uncomfortable position. Toby thought about what she said. Home. He called his cabin home. It was a stretch, but he let himself think that's what she truly meant. Toby hesitantly lifted himself off of Wyan, his cheeks flushed from the snowball of emotions that he'd just experienced. Toby agreed, but his voice was still a little croaky from the strain of his pent-up emotions. All right, let's go home. A soft shower of rain pitter-pattered on the roof and windshield. Wyan turned off the car and unbuckled her seatbelt. She looked over to Toby, who was asleep on the passenger side. They had a long ride home, and Toby didn't even realize he was tired due to his SEPA. Wyan debated whether or not to wake him up, but she decided on the former. Toby, we're back at the cabin, she said, putting a hand on his arm to gently shake him. Toby shifted in his seat, muttering something under his breath, then resting his head back on the window. Wyan rolled her eyes. Wakey, wakey. She gave him a firmer nudge. Toby's eyes opened abruptly, and his head snapped to Wyan. But then he relaxed when he saw that it was her. He stretched his arms out with a yawn. Good morning, he said, with a slight smile rubbing his eyes. It's almost 3 in the afternoon, Wyan said. Toby shrugged and unclipped his seatbelt. Close enough, Toby mumbled, looking at Wyan with a faint grin. Wyan's words caught in her throat as she forgot what she was going to say next. For some reason, whenever she looked at him, she felt butterflies suddenly flare up in her stomach. We need to bring the groceries in, especially the food, so it won't go bad, Wyan said, glancing out the windshield. All right, I can bring them in, Toby said, turning around in his seat and attempting to put on as many bags on his arms as possible. If he had to walk out in the rain, he would make the least number of trips possible. Ryan watched as Toby had at least 12 bags in his arms, wondering if he could actually pull the stunt off. Toby struggled to open his door, but once he did, he booked it for the cabin. Ryan couldn't help but laugh as he watched the antics through the car windshield. Toby made it inside, and after a few seconds later, he emerged from the cabin and ran back to the car. He flung Ryan's door open, catching her by surprise. "We gotta hurry! It's bucking down out here!" Toby scooped one arm under her knees and one under her arms, picking her up bridal style. She held onto him tightly, not wanting to be dropped on the muddy floor. He shut the door with his boot and ran inside. Thunder crackled through the sky. Toby set Ryan down on the couch. "There's still more bags in the car," Ryan chuckled, standing up. Toby pushed her back onto the sofa. "No, I must sacrifice myself to the rain gods," he stated, sounding completely serious. He yelled as he sprinted back outside and into the downpour. Ryan covered her mouth with her hand in an attempt to not laugh. She peeked through the window behind the sofa to see Toby getting soaked in the rain as he brought more bags inside. "Toby, you're gonna get hypothermia." She said this as Toby set an armful of bags on the floor. His dripping wet hair clung to his neck, and his clothes were soaked with water. "I was able to get all the bags," he said, on the bright side. "Plus, it's not cold enough to get hypothermia," he giggled, wiping his face with his sleeve as she shut the door. "You should go change. I'll put away the food," Ryan said, picking up one of the bags and sorting through it. Toby nodded. He wanted to offer to help, but the way his clothes clung to his body made his sensory issues flare. Okay, I'll change quickly," Toby said, kicking off his muddy boots near the door. He went back to the bedroom to change. Ryan sorted through each bag. It had been a while since she's bought a whole fridge and a pantry of food. She found a brown paper bag and the mix of plastic ones, and she tilted her head. She set the bag on the counter and peeked inside. A bouquet of pink roses was looking back at her. Her eyes widened at the sweet fragrance of the roses, and he took the bundle. She walked towards the back room with the flowers, feeling butterflies bubble up in her stomach again. But she didn't want to just assume they were for her. She looked up from the flowers to see Toby completely shirtless. Chapter 27. Wrapped up in bloody bandages. Toby's torso was almost as pale as snow. His chest glistened from the rain outside. It had a fair amount of scars and bandages. He wasn't terribly skinny. He was more lean, if anything. Toby had just finished putting on his sweatpants. Then Ryan walked into the room with a bouquet of roses. He paused. "Aw, damn it. I wanted to see your reaction when you pulled them out of the bag," Toby sighed, walking over to her. "Do you like them?" he asked. Toby obviously did not seem bothered by his own shirtlessness. Ryan's face turned a beet red at Toby's casual approach. She felt her heart beat a little faster than what could be considered normal. It was almost as if she were a giddy schoolgirl with a crush, or maybe those feelings were being uncovered from a long time ago. She cleared her throat, trying to maintain eye contact instead of letting her eyes look lower. "I do. They're really nice," she said, gently holding one of the petals up with her fingertip. The flustered feeling became more intense by the second as she felt Toby's eyes on her. Toby smiled brightly. "Phew, I picked good ones then," he said in relief, drying his hair with a white towel. He brushed his damp hair back, hanging up the towel. Ryan clenched the bouquet, as she wasn't sure of what to say. Toby fished through his dresser for a shirt. When did you get these?" Ryan asked quietly, smelling the floral scent of the roses. She soaked in every moment of the gift, even if it was from an axe murderer. "I was able to sneak them into the car when you weren't paying attention," he chuckled, pulling out his shirt. He was about to put his shirt on when he realized his bandages were soaked too. He cursed under his breath, tediously peeling them off. Ryan looked between the flowers and Toby before setting the flowers on a desk. "I can help," Ryan blurts, causing another wave of blush to color her face. Toby looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, tossing the bloody bandages into a trash can. "I mean, I can help you replace them," she added, biting the inside of her cheek with hesitation and an awful lot of embarrassment. Toby smiled at the gesture, sitting down on the bed. "Sure," he said. "The unused bandages are under the bathroom sink." Toby peeled the last few and threw them away. Wyatt exhaled a nervous breath as she got to the bathroom. She started to look through the cabinet. Oh God, why was she acting like this? He's a murderer! But he's really sweet and kind of cute. No, bad Wyatt. Pull yourself together. She shook away her thoughts and focused and found the box. It was a pink box, which was rather cute considering the contents were bandages. She composed herself, bringing the box back to the bedroom, her face instantly turning pink when she saw him. Motherfucker being charming and nice. She sat on the bed next to him, opening the box. There were no bandages inside the box. Instead, there was a stuffed raccoon that had little blue hearts stitched into it. Her eyes widened, and her head turned to Toby. He was sitting there with a stupid grin on his face. What is this? Wyatt asked, looking back at the little stuffed critter. Toby chuckled. What do you mean? It's a raccoon. Toby smirked, poking the stuffed animal's nose. I know, but why? Wyatt trailed off, feeling a bunch of different emotions at once. She took the soft raccoon from the box, holding it with as much care as she would a real animal. Why are you doing this? Wyatt asked. Are you trying to win me over with a bunch of gifts and words and a lovey-dovey crap? Because if you are... Wyatt paused. Toby leaned a little forward, trying to read Wyatt's conflicted expression as he awaited her next words. Because if you are, it's working, Wyatt whispered, rubbing the raccoon's fluffy face in thought. Toby had to bite down on his lip to stop a triumphant smile, but he didn't want to break his chance with her. Toby opened his mouth to say some reassuring words, but he was cut off by Wyatt's soft lips on his. His breath hitched, and his heart skipped a few beats. Wyatt leaned closer, and so did he. Toby closed his eyes, enjoying the feeling of her lips against his as they exchanged a few more. The kiss was short-lived as Wyatt pulled away, yet she stayed a few inches away from Toby's face. Wyatt cracked a smile at Toby's pink face, which was slowly turning more and more red as time went on. Thanks, Toby said softly, catching his breath. Wyatt raised an eyebrow. Thanks for what? Wyatt asked, tugging a strand of hair behind her ear. For letting me do this, he said before quickly pulling Wyatt on top of him and holding her waist. Wyatt's eyes widened, and she dropped the raccoon, using her arms to put the smallest amount of distance between them. What are you doing? She asked, but she didn't make any effort to pull away. Toby grinned, trailing a rough hand down her hip and then to her thigh. What do you think? Toby questioned, letting his hand rest on her thigh as his other hand made its way to the back of her neck. He pulled her face closer, connecting their lips once again, but this time he gave more passion than before. Wyatt's stomach fluttered, and she kissed him back. It felt so wrong, but so right. It felt like every fiber of her being was on fire. Her hand tangled in his hair, trying to push them even closer to each other. Her chest heaved, and she lost herself in the kiss. She was also starting to think that Toby had lost himself too. He had been waiting 10 years for this. She gently nipped at his lower lip with her teeth. A surprised noise escaped him as he opened his mouth a little wider for her to explore. Toby's tongue traveled across her lip before slipping into her mouth. Wyatt's tongue twisted and danced with his as her fingers caressed down his chest, feeling every imperfection there was. Toby shuddered in delight, and he parted their lips, flipping them over so he was leaning over her. He took a minute to catch his breath before he started leaving hot, open-mouthed kisses down her neck. Wyatt tilted her head up with a breathless sigh, giving him better access to her throat. Toby kissed around her neck, leaving no space unloved by him. He nibbled around a few places until he found a spot that enticed a sound of pleasure from Wyatt. Toby grinned under her skin and attacked the area, kissing, nibbling, and sucking until it left a blemish. He won her over, and now he wanted to show everyone that he did. Wyatt's head was clouded with bliss, but it was soon cut off by the feeling of something dripping onto her arm. She looked down to see blood running down Toby's arm from the thick scar that had been reopened. Her desire quickly replaced with concern and panic. "Oh my God, your arm!" Wine said, scooting out from under him. Toby looked down at the blood that was oozing down his arm. Fucking hell. He grumbled in frustration, mentally beating himself up for ruining their tension. He cupped his hand over the bloody scar. "Sorry," he mumbled, reaching out for a rag to soak up the blood. Wine sat up, putting a hand over the hickey as she suppressed the giddy feeling in her gut. "It's okay, Toby. It's fine, really," Wine said, pulling him to sit down next to her. She wiped the beads of blood down her arm. Toby sighed, some of his bangs falling into his eyes. "I think I might actually need those bandages," Toby chuckled, trying to ease off the panic. Wine regained her composure and nodded. "I can still help you put them on." Wine smiled. She smiled, lifting the rag to see the scar underneath. It wasn't anything too bad, and it didn't need stitches. "I'd like that," Toby said, getting up to grab the box of bandages. Wine watched as he came back to the bedroom with another box, this one being the first aid kit. "There better not be another stuffed animal in this one," Wine joked. Toby cracked a smile, opening the box and pulling out a roll of gauze and some other type of bandages. Wine took an antibacterial wipe and started to clean around the bloody wound, her mind still buzzing with the thought of their intimate moment. Maybe he wasn't such a bad guy after all. Chapter 28. Piece of the Rain. Wine gently wrapped Toby's arm with the gauze, making sure it was tight enough to hold but not tight enough to be uncomfortable. She felt Toby's heavy stare, and she hesitated to meet it. She took a bigger bandage and pressed it over one of the most not very taken care of cuts. "How did you get all of these?" Wine asked, changing the subject slightly. Toby itched his jaw. There was some stubble starting to grow back. "A lot of them are from me being clumsy and stupid," Toby said, looking down at his scars. "Some of them healed, others are newer, but some of them are from falling off my ATV or getting hurt on the missions I have to do," he said, rambling slightly. Wine's eyes widened. "You have an ATV?" Wine questioned, pausing with one of the bandages in hand. Toby nodded. "Yep, I stole it." He smirked, causing Wine to roll her eyes. "Do you even know how to drive it?" she asked, putting the bandage on a spot on his chest. "I am a great driver," Toby stated as he crossed his arms. Wine uncrossed his arms to access one of the small cuts. She put a few butterfly strips across the cut in hopes that it would seal them shut. "That's not what the scratches on my car say," Wine said in a matter-of-fact tone. Toby rolled his eyes. "I wanted to show you my ATV, but now it's raining." Toby looked out of the window, where the view was distorted by raindrops. Wine's eyes followed Toby's gaze outside, and her hand slipped down to hold Toby's hand. Now that the bandages and gloves were off, she could see just how mutilated his hands were. His palms had thick calluses, and the skin on his fingers had a bunch of divots and bumps from uneven healing. Toby's eyes went to look at where Wine was touching his hand. A small stab of embarrassment formed in his chest as she skimmed her thumb over his knuckles. He didn't let the feeling get to him as they sat so close. The silence wasn't loud or awkward. It was calm, maybe even peaceful. The sound of the rain on the metal roof was very relaxing, making Toby's frame unwind a bit. Toby wrapped his arms around Ryan, enveloping her in his embrace. Wine felt her cheeks warm as she was tugged towards him, her head resting close to his neck. She rested there for a few moments before biting his neck. Toby jumped slightly at the notion. "Ah!" He looked down at Wyan, who was giddy eternally. A confused but amused smirk crossed his face. "What was that for?" "Payback," Wyan snickered, wrapping her arms around his waist and biting him again. "Hey, quit that!" Toby said, trying to sound tough but failing miserably. He leaned his head away. "Maybe you should learn to wear a shirt." Wyan bit his neck again, harder this time, and it was enough to leave a mark. Toby sighed in defeat before he was struck with an idea. He picked Wyan from around the waist and started to carry her towards the door. Toby grinned and put her over his shoulder. "Hey!" 𝐀𝐦𝐬𝐚's eyes widened quickly as she felt him carry her outside. The drizzle from the sky started to soak her clothes. "We just dried off. Put me down," Toby said, and 𝐬𝐬𝐚 said in a serious tone. But she couldn't escape the smile on her lips. "Put you down? All right," Toby said before plopping 𝐬𝐬𝐚 down on the wet forest floor. She gasped at the cold rain that started to pour down on them even harder. "Toby!" She grabbed his wrist and yanked him down beside her. She forgot how Toby wasn't wearing a shirt, and now his bandages were getting soaked all over again. Okay, maybe we should go back inside," Toby said, his hair still dripping from the rain. 𝐬𝐬𝐚 nodded, and before she could get herself up, Toby scooped her up and hurried back into the cabin. The cool air of the cabin met 𝐬𝐬𝐚's skin, making her shiver. Toby put 𝐬𝐬𝐚 on the floor in front of the furnace before searching for a lighter. 𝐬𝐬𝐚 hugged her knees to her chest, tucking a strand of her wet hair behind her ear. "Cold?" Toby chuckled. Toby took his thick coat from the table and draped it over 𝐬𝐬𝐚 as he started the fire. "Yeah, a little bit," she said, gritting her teeth in order to stop their chattering. She pulled the coat over her to cover more of her body. The coat smelled like Toby, like a campfire and a little bit of musk. Toby was so focused on making some warmth for 𝐬𝐬𝐚, he couldn't really feel the cold, but 𝐬𝐬𝐚 definitely could. Fire is hot, and it's easy to make. The small flame inside the furnace soon turned into a large fire. Toby tossed a few logs to keep it going. 𝐬𝐬𝐚 scooted closer to the fire, and Toby sat next to her, putting an arm around her shoulders. "You're so cold," 𝐬𝐬𝐚 said, putting her hands on his cheeks. It didn't make him any warmer, and it was an odd sensation to feel the open scarring on Toby's cheek. Her fingertips seemed to trace the edge of the scar. Toby's face lit up with blush, and he froze. "I honestly couldn't tell," Toby shrugged, shifting a little more to a more comfortable seated position. Feeling cold, 𝐬𝐬𝐚 pushed her arms through the sleeves of the coat, leaning slightly against him. The fire crackled, and the rain clicked on the roof. Toby started to relax against 𝐬𝐬𝐚 until there was a knock at the door. Switch of POV. The police station was buzzing with Roger's case now that it had just been brought out of the dark. Officer McKinney was in Detective Jardin's office discussing the new evidence. "So, we're just going to send out a couple guys tonight to patrol around the forest just off of Denver," Jardin stated, leaning back in his seat. "Is the weather in this weather at night? That sounds risky. I mean, have you not heard of all the things that happen in that forest?" McKinney said this, crossing her arms over her chest. "It's not going to be anything serious. It's meant to see if there's anything suspicious happening in those areas. Forget that paranormal rumor bullshit. That's just a story that parents tell their kids so that they don't try to go places they shouldn't be." Jardin scoffed, clicking a few files on his laptop. The files included a bunch of paperwork about Tobias Rogers, their only suspect. "What if he's dead? How do you know that it's him?" McKinney questioned, standing behind the detective's desk to look at the files as well. Jardin clicked a pen in his hand before going over to a different file. "Each of the victims knew each other, or they went to school together," he said, pulling up old class photos with certain people circled. "None of these disappearances happened until Tobias's house burned away. The victims just so happened to be the people in the athletic teams like football, cheer, and baseball." McKinney raised an eyebrow. "What does that have to do with anything?" she asked. Jardin shrugged. "Well, high schoolers are assholes. They probably picked Tobias because they were quote-unquote better," Jardin said, not really sugarcoating the truth. "And what about her?" McKinney pointed to the separate picture, 𝐬𝐬𝐚's photo. Jardin tossed the pen on his desk. "Love interest?" Jardin said it hesitantly, scratching the back of his neck. McKinney gave him a bland look. "She has no connections or records or to being a bad person, except for..." Jardin paused, typing in his laptop. "Except for what?" McKinney said, staring at the screen in front of her. Jardin pulled up a picture of Brad. This was one of the victims. He was supposedly with 𝐬𝐬𝐚 since high school. He also played football and basketball, Jardin said, turning in his chair to look at McKee. "Are you trying to tell me that some love story between some killer and a random girl?" McKinney said. She was totally not convinced of the story, and they needed something if they were to arrest the person behind the scene. Yes, but there's a lot more to it. Jordan closed his laptop. Standing on his feet, McKinney sighed. Let's get this wild goose chase started. Alrighty, guys. Just, wow. Oh, wow. I wish I could read more to you guys, but I sadly, I had to cut the story a little short, and whatnot. But I hope you guys did enjoy so far. What do you guys think is going to happen next? And let me know in the comments down below. Do you guys have a suspicion that they may actually catch onto Toby, or will they end up finding nothing? They'll just get lost. And what do you guys also think is going to happen to those potential officers going into those woods? I think we can all take a very good guess, but let me know your guesses down below in the comment section. For me, may whoever they believe in be bestowed on their souls when they enter them woods. That's all I gotta say. Also, for certain scenes of whatnot that happened in the story, period, I didn't even expect it. I was like, ooh, 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 damn, period. It gets good in here. It gets good, y'all. It's getting good. Now, I still am not aware if there's any lemon or smut in this book. I'm not sure, but I have a feeling there will be. There will be. So we just gotta keep an eye out, y'all. We just gotta keep an eye out. Anywho, if you guys have any stories, any other stories you'd like to recommend or anything, please let me know in the comment sections down below. I have plenty of stories I really wanted and I'm planning to read very soon. It's just I've been stuffed with busyness to the point where I haven't even had time to sleep or do my hair. Like, let me tell y'all this, right? So I was really tired. I had a mask in my hair. I was planning on washing my hair and everything. It was around 11 p.m. Tell me why I literally passed out. Didn't even brush my teeth, do my hair, anything. And I had a mask in my hair with like apple cider vinegar and stuff, and I passed out, y'all. Then I ended up waking up at 5 in the morning because I felt like a clip in my hair, and I woke up and I realized, shit, I have a mask in my hair, and you're not supposed to have mask in your hair like to sleep with because of stuff you can. It's just not healthy. It's not good for your hair. So I quickly, racing like damn near the Flash and washed my hair and everything. It did everything I needed to do at 5 in the morning. Then I ended up finishing around 7 in the morning and slept at 7 in the morning and then woke up at 11 a.m. to go to school. Y'all, that's just a hint of what I've been going through. It's been busy up around here. But don't worry, y'all. I am doing the best I can to try and get you guys updated on the stories you love and appreciate. Like I said, I think last video, I am still trying to catch up on some old requests that I have received and I do know about. If you'd like to remind me of a request that you have given me about a story you'd like me to read or your own story, please let me know in the comments down below. I already have some in mind that I'm gonna try and start reading. And yeah, overall, y'all, it's been kind of crazy around here, but don't worry, we're getting it under control little by little. Trust. Anywho, I hope you guys have an amazing year 2025. I know it's been kind of rough with everybody and going around, especially with everything that's going around. My advice is, especially to the Americans, stick close, spend time with your family and friends, be prepared for anything, and just connect with your community, speak with your neighbors, talk with your friends, try and kind of build more community communication type stuff. I wish everyone luck, stay safe during these tough times, and y'all shall see and hear me in the next futuristic of videos, y'all. Or another fanfic that you already are waiting on for me to update. I shall see y'all in the futuristic video. Bye and peace, y'all.